What if Dave Aranda became Kyle Whittingham? Would that be good enough for you people? Locked on Baylor.
You are Locked on Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
We ready. Like it's a revenge tour. We ready to step it up, and it's on.
First time we've heard it out loud. Welcome to the Baylor Football Revenge Tour. Stop one, Salt Lake City tomorrow when the Bears take on the Utah Utes. Welcome to another episode of Locked on Baylor, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Thank you so much for making it your first listen today and every day. I am your host, Cam Stewart of ESPN Central Texas and The Cam Show on Rogue Media Sports Network. So let's talk about this defense that essentially won game one for the Bears in convincing fashion and whether that will hit the road for said revenge tour. Dave Aranda, take note of Kyle Whittingham's career. It's flown under the radar for a long time, but dang, you would look really nice in those career numbers and what Baylor is going to need to do at Rice-Eccles Stadium in order to get a potentially historic win for the program. All that and more coming up on Locked on Baylor, starting with the defense. I was so impressed with this defense in week one. And I've said so during the week, and I've always said it with the caveat that I will use again. I know they played an FCS team, and they were down to their backup quarterback, but I really like the makeup of this defense. I like it more than last year. I thought they played with more of an edge in week one than they did most weeks last year, including against, their opening week opponent, which was Texas State, the game they lost in 2023. And I don't love using things like that, the edge factor, the chip on their shoulder, because it's not quantifiable. And we love quantifiable things here on the Locked On Podcast Network, but you could see it. And there are other parts of this team where I could see it that I will probably talk about next week. But specifically on this defense, again, another unquantifiable thing, they looked faster too. They rallied to the ball a lot better. I thought they didn't back down from a physicality challenge, which I think they did on both sides of the ball in most of the season last year. They did not do that against Tarleton. And I saw some really impressive performances. You already heard me talk about them. Jackie Marshall, Caden Jenkins, Keaton Thomas, a couple other guys out there played pretty well. But I said this with JT on the show yesterday. Let's just look at the 11 you put out there on the field. Without doubt, that is a better unit than you had in 2023. Are we going to see what they do against a quote-unquote real team? Yes, we're going to see that tomorrow. It's not going to be the end-all, be-all of their season. If they don't perform well tomorrow, they can certainly get better, but that's going to be the litmus test. Here's how you look against an FBS team. Oh, yeah, and of the 130 FBS teams out there, this is the number 11 one in the entire country. So, yeah, you're getting a pretty good test out there in week two of the season. I love hearing from Devyn Bobby, who you heard in the open there, that they're up for this challenge, that they are ready to do this, because I think these guys are excited to get out there. They know that this is better personnel than last year. And I think they have rallied around their head coach being a defensive play caller. We heard it from Jackie Marshall last weekend. Called him the GOAT. They want to go out there and play green for Dave Aranda. The GOAT seems pretty far, but it's pretty obvious from what we've heard in the preseason and through this first week and a half of the regular season that this Baylor defense does like playing for Dave Aranda. The players love having him out there calling the plays and getting more into the ball of it all. And that leads me to my second point. The personnel on the field is better. The personnel on the sideline is better. Matt Powledge last year felt for him a little bit. First time being a full-fledged defensive coordinator. It was a mess. It was a young roster. It was one that clearly was not ready for the schedule that they had in 2023. Now you still have Powledge on the staff, a guy who the players also seem to like, but now you have one of the most accomplished defensive coordinators in college football calling the plays. So the players out there are better. The coaching for the defensive side of the ball is better. That is reason for confidence, Bears fans. That's not your local homer telling you how great everything is and sunshine and rainbows. We need to see it happen, but that is cause for some positivity. There are other parts of this team that you can't necessarily see that with yet. The offensive line. I don't know. No idea. They weren't very good last year, and I don't know what they added this year. On the defensive side of the ball, you have added real pieces and guys who you have seen perform, like a Keaton Thomas, who played in the Big 12 and then was a monster in JUCO. Kendrick Simpkins, big-time player at Western Kentucky, comes in through the portal. Jaquez Evans, the preseason Conference USA Player of the Year last year, he comes in through the portal. Linus Noel was eating guys alive last year. So there are tangible performers that are coming back to this team. Jackie Marshall's another one who was hurt all of last year, really showed you some flashes in 22. So this is not, oh my gosh, am I drinking the Kool-Aid because I think this defense is better? You're not. It was a bad unit last year. It was the worst of the Big 12. They gave up almost 35 points a game. It was worse on the road than it was at home. That's going to be the key. Will this defense travel? Because it is better on paper than what we saw last year. The game is not played on paper. So there's room for optimism, absolutely. But this is the test. If Baylor's defense can show up on the road, that opens up a lot of positive avenues for this team. I believe they're going to get to 6 wins, but a lot of that is faith. We have a lot of it at Baylor, right? Because there's so much new to this team. But I'd be lying to you if I told you I wasn't impressed with what I saw last Saturday. Because be that as it may, that it's an FCS opponent, you hadn't held anyone to 3 points or less in a decade? Is that right? We might be going all the way back to the opening game of McLean Stadium in 2014 to find the last time you held an opponent under 3 points. So there is something to be said there. That's an accomplishment because you faced other FCS teams in the past. You faced Long Island, you faced Albany, you faced Texas Southern and Abilene Christian, whomever it may be. You didn't hold them to 3 points or less. This team did it. So, yeah, you take the competition into account, but it also doesn't take away completely from how impressive the performance was. But we got to see if it comes out on the road. You got to take the show on the road, man. Because we talked about offense all offseason long. If this defense can take the show on the road and be impressive in week 2 against Utah, against one of the best teams in the country, against one of the best quarterbacks in this conference, against one of the best tight end rooms in all of America, then yeah, you are feeling very positive about yourself, Baylor fans. I'm telling you, that to me is going to be a huge, huge test in terms of we might have different outlooks on how the season is going to go after this one game. And I'm specifically looking at the defensive side of the ball. We will be talking about the head coach and what this best case scenario is for Dave Aranda. And it might be a little bit closer than you think. But first, I have to tell you that today's episode of Locked On Baylor is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Talent Solutions. So when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals. It's kind of how it goes, right? Well, if you're not looking at LinkedIn, you're not looking in the right spot. It ain't like any other job board, okay? Helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't even looking for the job, but they're perfect for the job. 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate from LinkedIn within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional. It's why 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions. What's that? Because my computer's freezing up. Terms and conditions do apply. A huge narrative for this season is obviously Dave Aranda's future with the program. And looking back at Dave Aranda's tenure as the head coach for the Bears. I was one of the people that was surprised they stuck with him for another year. I understand the motives behind it. I didn't agree with it at the time, and I'm very skeptical of it now, to be quite honest with you. And now every game Baylor goes into, there is the opportunity of life or death scenario in terms of Dave Aranda's tenure at Baylor, right? If they beat Utah this weekend and it's a big win, that could go a long way towards saving Dave Aranda's job. If they lose at Houston, he might not get on the bus or plane home. Every game is going to be like that to a certain extent. And one of the things that has kept me alive in the Dave Aranda race, kept me breathing in this Dave Aranda support, is the guy up in Morgantown, Neil Brown. If we're talking short-term expectations or goals for Dave Aranda, Neil Brown's a great guy to look at. He was so fired in 2022. So fired, man. He's like the only coach ever to lose by 2 touchdowns in overtime. Remember that? Lost to Kansas. Pick 6 at the end of the game. So this was before we knew Kansas was any kind of good. So it was like, this dude's gone. Gone. West Virginia is down the drain again. And then he comes back last year. He wins 9 games. And all of a sudden, all is right in Morgantown. They love Neil Brown again. Or at least the leash is a little bit longer than it was after 2022. I can't tell you how crazy similar that situation was for Neil Brown after 2022, as similar as it was to Dave Aranda last year. The difference being, Dave Aranda had one season that was much better than one Neil Brown has ever had. Won the conference, won the Sugar Bowl, 12 games, top 5 final ranking. Neil Brown cannot sing that. So in terms of a short-term goal of, hey, here's what it would look like. Here's your hope for Dave Aranda turning this thing around in the short term. We've already seen it in this conference. Neil Brown is the guy. But if we want this to be a long-term thing, what does that look like? Can we point to someone in college football that has the long-term success at a program that's not too dissimilar from Baylor that can give us some hope that Dave Aranda can turn this thing around? I think we see it a lot more in basketball. I can think of a great example in college basketball. After 3 years, like the Duke fans wanted Mike Krzyzewski out big time. After 4 years, they wanted him out. They got shelled by Virginia in an ACC tournament, and they were done with this guy. They were putting for sale signs on his lawn. Flash forward 35 years, and he's the most successful coach in the history of college basketball. So it happens more in basketball, I think, than in football. And especially it happened more back then because we don't have the patience we did back then. But the guy that I think of, if I'm thinking long-term success for Baylor and what that might actually look like, I'm looking across the field on Saturday. Kyle Whittingham is that guy. If you want a long-term positive outlook and what that might look like for Dave Aranda and Baylor football, look no further than Kyle Whittingham at Utah. You could even look to a guy who was on Baylor staff at some point this year, and Gary Patterson. That's what long-term sustained success at a school like that looks like. Kyle Whittingham takes over for Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer leaves to go to Florida, one of the biggest jobs in the country, after a perfect season with Alex Smith at quarterback at Utah. I think he actually had another year after that. And it's like, okay, Utah's done. Utah they're no longer the BCS Cinderella bracket buster type of college football program anymore. They're just going to go back to being Utah, right? Except they didn't. And Kyle Whittingham, this is year 20. He's had 2 losing seasons in 19 years. 2. That's as many as Dave Aranda has. That's less than Dave Aranda's had in 4 years at Baylor. Because he went 6-7, not 6-6 in 2022. That's what tripped me up there. So, like this, talk about the model of consistency. And not to sound like I continue to put Utah on a pedestal, it's tough not to, but you want to talk about college football programs that have won in the last decade, consistently won the last decade. So after those 2 losing seasons that Whittingham had when they first came into the Pac-12, Utah is one of those teams. It is a short list of teams, and Utah is on it. I'm talking like Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State. Utah is in that discussion, man. I mean, OU as well. OU definitely. But you look at Michigan, Texas, USC, Florida, some of these other blue bloods, they have not put together a decade like Utah has, where they've been a winning team every year. And they've had a couple of conference championships and are the odds-on favorite to do it again in a new conference. So if you want to see what it could be like long-term for Dave Aranda at the best-case scenario, I think you're looking at Kyle Whittingham. Again, 2 losing seasons in 19 years. He's won the National Coach of the Year in 2 separate seasons, and that amounts to about 4 different awards because all these kind of publications give it out, okay? But 2008 and 2019, he won the Coach of the Year nationally. In 08, by the way, they were 13-0. Talk about still being bracket busters. There you go. 3 conference championships in that time in 2 different conferences. A career 674 win percentage. The guy wins 2/3 of his games. That's all you can ask for. That's a heck of a successful head coach. Because, spoiler alert, Dave Aranda has not won 2/3 of his games. No Baylor coach has won 2/3 of their games. Ever. I don't even think Bryles got to that with the tough couple of first seasons. They might have just gotten to 670. I should really think about or look that up before I just say that. But this we're talking an elite coach that wins 2/3 of their games. An elite coach. And by the way, a career record of 1-0 against Nick Saban. Just putting it out there. They beat Alabama. Undefeated Alabama. Undefeated regular season Alabama. They lost to Florida in the conference championship in the Sugar Bowl. And that's when they were playing in the Mountain West. We talk about it time and time again, what this Big 12 is going to look like without UT and OU there. And that there is something for the taking in terms of who is going to be the consistent team program at the top of the totem pole in this Big 12. And when the rumors of the breakup started, it was right after Baylor had that great season in 2021. I think a lot of us were like, this is Baylor's time. It's Baylor's time to take this over. Oklahoma State, maybe, they'll be in there, but it is beckoning for a team to be running this conference, and it could actually be Baylor because we thought we had the right guy, and we still might. But we haven't seen that in the last 2 years. This record, this run that Utah has had, that's what it would look like to be at the top of the totem pole in your conference. They were at the top of it in the Mountain West, them and TCU duking it out. And then they go into the Pac-12, and in short order, they're that team in the Pac-12. That conference with USC and Oregon. Utah was that team in short order. So you want to get back to that. You want to say, we need a guy who is going to keep us at the top of this conference that is just beckoning for an alpha dog. Look no further than the resume of Kyle Whittingham. That's the kind of coach you need. So that is the best case scenario, I think, for Dave Aranda long-term at Baylor, is to have a resume like Kyle Whittingham. Now, what's it going to take? What is it going to take for Dave Aranda to beat Kyle Whittingham this weekend? Well, I'm going to outline a couple of milestones that they need to hit to get there. That's coming up next. How about game time, huh? Want to go to a game? Want to go to something that needs a ticket? Game, concert, theater, comedy show. I'm telling you, Game Time is the only place to go. It's the only place I buy tickets because it takes the hassle out of it. I don't like the hassle. I don't know about you guys. I don't like it. I go in the Game Time app. I see the price I'm going to pay. Is that so much to ask for from these other guys? Yes, apparently it is. Game Time's the only one that really does it. All-in pricing, and you can see the view from your seats right there. They also have the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time is going to credit you 110% of the difference. That purchase with your hard-earned money, it's covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDON, COLLEGE, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? What was that? Oh, yeah, Game Time. And we are counting down the hours to Game Time when the Bears will take on the Utah Utes in Rice-Eccles Stadium in Salt Lake at altitude at 2:30 on Saturday. We haven't talked about that. It's usually such a hot-button topic. When Baylor went to BYU a couple years ago, when the basketball team went out to Denver for the tournament, we're always talking altitude. I haven't talked about it this week because there is a bigger challenge at hand, and that's the team that's going to be wearing red, the Utah Utes. And Baylor's still heavy dogs, more than 2 touchdown dogs in what is a conference game. I know it's not a conference game; it's a conference opponent. You're not going to see many times that you're 2 touchdown underdogs at least in these kinds of games, these conference games. But that's the tail of the tape, man. Utah was a top 15, top 10 team last year, decimated by injuries. They brought a lot of their guys back and brought the injured guys back. That's why they're number 11 in the country. The national media, they see Baylor as a 3-9 team. They don't see it as Jake Spavital. They don't see it as Daquan Finn. They don't see it as Dave Aranda calling plays. They don't see Keaton Thomas. They see 3-9. Bill Parcells, what did he used to say? You are what your record says you are. And to everyone right now, they're still 3-9. They don't even count the 1-0. They're 0-0 in FBS. So what's it going to take for Baylor to win this game? Because it would be a big upset. Well, Stewie Stats has come together with some things that Baylor will need to hit, some markers that they will need to hit if they have any chance of winning this game. Because it will take an elite performance to beat Utah. An elite performance, which I don't know if we've seen an elite performance from Baylor in a couple years now. The first one that I look at, 40% on third down conversion rates in this game. That's what it will probably take. Now, that's an elite number in a conference game. The best third down conversion rate teams in the country hit about 38, 39% for the year. 40% in this game would constitute something of an elite performance offensively for Baylor against a really good defense in Utah. You were 67% last week against Tarleton. So yeah, it'll take a dip, obviously. That's what's expected when you face a competition jump like this. That's going to be one. Keep that defense on the field. You're also, I think, going to need to step your game up rushing. I'm talking about 175 yards rushing. I don't necessarily need one guy rushing for 100 yards. I notice I didn't say yards per carry, which is more what I care about than rushing yards total, but I think 175, that's a good number to hit. That's what Utah hit last week. Baylor hit 164 last week. 175 is around the average that Jake Spavital's teams had at Cal last year. I think it was 174 or 184, one of those. 175, I think that's a nice round number. I mean, lest we forget, it is the 175th anniversary of the founding of the city of Waco. So maybe that's in there too. 6 penalties or less. They had 6 last week against Tarleton, and that's not a terrific number. It's not terrible. It's not as clean as you'd want it to be in a home game against Tarleton. And so you would think I'd like that to be a little better. You're also in a hostile environment. This is an offensive line that some of these guys need some games under their belt. And this team has not played in a hostile environment in 2 years, if we're being totally honest. No disrespect to Kansas State. But you only played 4 road games last year. The bounce house was a day game. They were all gone by the time it was 35-7. They didn't even see their team blow it. So I expect some false starts, some miscommunications. I expect those kinds of things when it comes to the environment that they're going to be playing in on Saturday. So 6 penalties, I think that's a good number to aim for, and hopefully not pass interferences or personal fouls in some of those 15-yarders. Okay. 3+ sacks. That's a tough number for this team, I think. I still don't know what this pass rush is. I don't know that it's a good pass rush, let alone an elite pass rush. I like some of their guys up front, obviously like Jackie Marshall. I wouldn't call him a pass rusher, but 3 would be a big time number for them. They only got 2 against Tarleton. But if they can make Cam Rising uncomfortable for a guy who, once again, has not played an FBS team since January of 2023 and put some of that rust back on him, that could go a long way for this Baylor defensive performance. And it doesn't always show up in sacks necessarily. It could be, obviously TFLs when they're handing it off, or, forcing a pocket, forcing an incomplete pass, QB hurries, all those things count too. But I think 3+ sacks, if you're in that territory, you're living pretty good if you're Baylor. And then we get into some coach talk here. You got to win the turnover battle. You just have to. Neither of these teams won the turnover battle last week. How about that? They both played FCS teams, and neither one of them won the turnover battle. Daquan Finn threw 2 picks. Baylor only picked 1 off on the other end. You didn't even beat Tarleton in the turnover battle. That's what any team on the road especially needs to strive for. Almost every game whatever team wins the turnover battle usually wins the game. So that's one. And then the red zone battle. Baylor was pretty good in the red zone last week. They did have a turnover on downs in there. They did have a pick in there, but overall they were pretty fine in the red zone. And I liked the plays they ran in the red zone. And when you have a mobile quarterback and get outside of the pocket and your head coach is saying he needs to run more, that opens up the playbook even more in the red zone. We talk about fine margins when it comes to these Big 12 games, these big matchups, and upset bids. Those are your fine margins right there. If you can force Utah to some field goals and your offense can hum a little bit, that could be the break you need. So without further ado, let's break that down. Let's run down the list. 40% on third down, 175 yards rushing, 6 penalties or less, 3+ sacks, win the turnover battle, win the red zone battle. If you do those things, if you do the lion's share of those things, Baylor's got a real shot. But let's not make any mistake. This is an uphill battle. Big time. I've gotten most of your score predictions. If you haven't, drop that down in the comments. But if you have, I want to see what you think Baylor needs to do to win these games. To win this game, I should say. Which of these things? What's the smart goal, the attainable, reachable goal that we can see? Put that down in the comments below and let me know what you think is the best case scenario for Dave Aranda long-term at Baylor. Drop that down in the comments below. Compare him to a coach that you might like or admire and what that needs to look like. Be sure to like, subscribe, ring that notification bell on YouTube to get notified wherever we're dropping it here or wherever you get your podcasts for free every day. And we're going to have a post game tomorrow right here on this channel. Thank you so much for making it your first listen today and every day. We'll see you after the game on Locked On Baylor.